in terms of what has happened with me in particular, and my life and what's going on with me, the way that I approach writing about it is that I'm not really sentimental about
Mhm.
it because I won. I'm
Okay.
here.
Pain and suffering comes for all of us, of course, but it often defines our work rather than being a facet we have to move beyond. Meri Nana-Ama Danquah came to prominence with her book on depression as a Black woman. I was expecting a different read. What I found was someone who did not relish the hurt, but also didn't avoid it. Someone who was honest about the ways she had colluded in her own suffering. She swept the reader along with such vigor and relentlessness, it was beguiling to read, all the while talking about a life often unheard. It's interesting speaking to someone who embraces the obstacles and integrates them into her work, accepting the deeply unavoidable while also embracing its passing. I hope you enjoy. This is The Other Pod.
Hi.
How are you doing today?
I am well. I have had a hectic week and, because I'm in the middle of an international move. So,
Oh, wow. Where are
yeah.
you going?
I am in Ghana, West
Oh, right
Africa.
now.
And yeah, right now.
Interesting. I didn't
Right
know that.
now.
Sorry, I thought you were still in Los Angeles.
Mm-mm.
Okay,
I left.
cool.
I left. I hightailed it out.
I understand. I very much understand. How is Ghana right now?
Oh, Ghana is beautiful. Ghana is lovely. Ghana's home,
Yeah.
and I'm really enjoying being here. I just you know, I miss so much of the US. And
Yeah.
then just when I'm missing it, I realize that what I'm missing no longer exists.
Will you talk about that? Because
So,
my first question actually was about your immigration to the United States and some
mm,
context why you left Ghana. And I didn't understand you were already back. I thought you went back and forth, but not committed. So I would love to hear
mhm.
about, I guess, the ephemera that once was and is now gone and what that was for you.
Let's see. I came to the United States at the age of 6 with my parents. Um, my mother was coming to go to school. They were not like refugees or anything like that,
Right.
which doesn't matter. I mean, people come for many reasons. I'm just making a distinguishing. I'm just distinguishing because that will make it more important later
Yeah.
on. Um, I came with my parents. My dad in my youth worked with the Ghana Embassy in Washington, D.C., where we were based. We were in the DMV area, the D.C., Maryland, Virginia. And so my dad worked with the embassy. My mom was in school and she was working, doing nursing. Um, I was in school because I was a child. And then I grew up here, basically. Here being there. I grew up there in the US, and it was a pretty, in terms of where I grew up, where was idyllic. I grew up in Tacoma Park, Maryland, which was a really kind of very Volkswagen Birkenstock, it was like Berkeley.
Yeah.
So it was really lovely in terms of that. I did not have an idyllic home life, but my parents got divorced. I've written a lot about that, particularly in my memoir about depression. When I became a young adult, I was informed that I was undocumented. And I had entered the country legally
Right.
because my parents didn't come as refugees, mind you. I had been on a diplomatic passport even, and it went out of status because they were divorced and neither one thought, cared, whatever, to fix my paperwork and made it my problem when I became an adult. And at the time that I learned this, my mother was a permanent resident and my dad was a citizen. And I was 18, 19, had no money, and didn't really understand like I do now. I mean, it was like in the 1980s. Didn't understand because I thought, yeah, I grew up. I mean, like, hey, I went to like, second grade. I did. Who's gonna ask me to leave?
I
Little did
know.
I know. Little did I know. So, um, fortunately, and what was interesting was at that time there was an amnesty happening through Reagan.
Right.
Through Reagan, he was doing an amnesty, but I didn't understand any of that stuff. I didn't know what it meant. I didn't, because mind you, I didn't grow up with this sort of I was a child, growing up, and then here I am suddenly dealing with this immigration knowledge, and I didn't know anything. And so I was undocumented for many, 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 many years throughout most of my young adulthood, throughout my 20s, certainly, and part of my 30s. And I finally finally applied for the Einstein visa and through my writing.
Yeah.
Because I was unemployable, all the little loopholes were closing,
Hey.
you know.
Yeah.
So you have to fill out this form. Now you have to fill out this form. Now you have to have this on your driver's license. And everything was sort of closing. And I, living in California, and I'm sure you're old enough to know this, that I'm like aging you now,
No, no, don't worry. Don't worry.
but I'm sure you're probably old enough to remember Proposition 187
Of course.
in 1994, which actually, interestingly, was the bellwether for a lot of what's happening right now.
Hmm.
Proposition 187 was one of the most hateful propositions. It empowered the average citizen to become an immigration officer, essentially.
Right.
So people were scared to go to the hospital. It was encouraging doctors and emergency rooms to turn in people, teachers to turn in their students, neighbors to turn in each other, and it passed in California,
Yeah.
which when people talk about California being like a sanctuary state now, and I'm like, wasn't always so,
It's even
but.
now it's complicated here, which is
It's complicated, yes, even now. And so, I really went through a lot during those years. I really went through a lot of fear, of hiding, when you're aware that anything, like I actually was in the early 90s, I was caught in well, I should use the word caught because I wasn't caught in that way. I found myself in the midst of an immigration raid at LAX. And I was able to finagle my way out of it.
I'm sorry.
And so, yeah, and I was able to finagle my way out of it because I pretended to be a Black American.
What
Like
does that mean? What is the presentation of that? What does that mean?
the presentation of that was that I became whatever their stereotype was of Shaniqua.
Wow.
I wanted them to think that there was no other place this person could be from but here in
And it
LA,
worked?
South Central, wherever. Yeah, it
Yeah.
worked. Yeah, it did. Because the guy was like, can I, he needed to see my ID and stuff. And I'm like, who the fuck are you? I'm like, the fuck?
Yeah.
And so he was just like looking at me. And then at one point he was not looking at me. And then I went and
And
looking
that
at
worked.
him. And so then finally he's like, all right, go.
Wow. I
Yeah.
feel like I
And
haven't
then
seen any writing on that. Did you ever write that story?
well, yeah, I'm trying to write a memoir right now
Okay.
that is tentatively titled A Portrait of the Artist as an Undocumented Immigrant. So, I'm gonna do that in that story, but it's just so there's so much happening every day, that I'm trying to kind of separate that from what I'm writing because what I'm writing is also really a story about becoming a writer because it was becoming a writer. I had to become a writer because I had no other choice. I had no other way to eat.
Can
So,
I can I ask you a question about that?
of
Because
course,
your
yes.
writing is so different than so many other things that I've written, and I mean that as a compliment. But what I find so it's one of my questions. How did you navigate the feelings you have about yourself and the
Mhm,
way that you write, and the fact that when you write, there has to be maybe not love, but at least curiosity or interest towards yourself, right? And then the way that you do it has this incredible amount of self reflection, which is a luxury of writing after the fact, but at the same time, you don't position yourself as a victim. Like I find your writing style, and I mean this as a compliment, perplexing because there's so many different things going on at the same time. There's so
mhm,
much negativity about self or struggle. There's so much understanding of your position, sometimes of privilege versus other things, and keeping that in mind. And then when you
mhm.
talk about all of these different emotions and moments, again, it's not like, woe is me, I'm a victim, but rather, I'm going through it. And sometimes even the hardship, I feel like you almost invite it in. And I feel like it's a very unusual way to do memoir, a way to do, suffering and difficulty. And I'm curious, is that always the way you wrote? And then when you write, is there a huge amount of like editing and going back, or is this how it comes out?
Oh no, it definitely doesn't. I mean, parts of it comes out like, parts of it comes out like that, like anything else. You have to go back and you go over it and you go over it. And I would say that I do a lot of thinking before I get to the page.
Okay.
Before I actually sit down, I find sitting at the computer really punishing. When I have to sit at the computer and I don't know what to say, and staring at that screen and staring at that blinking cursor. And I find that really punishing. And so I do a lot of thinking and jotting notes down while I'm washing dishes or while I'm walking or, so something will be on my mind. And by the time that it's like, certainly not fully formed, but, partially formed into something that is recognizable, I'll sit down and take all the notes and then I'll start writing. And then it's like, okay, now it's got some form, it's got some substance, I can work with it. And then I try to figure out, where I'm going because sometimes it's just the beginning and I'll write myself into a corner and then I have to back out and go, okay, that didn't work. And so, but in terms of what has happened with me in particular, and my life and what's going on with me, the way that I approach writing about it is that I'm not really sentimental about
Mhm.
it because I won. I'm
Okay.
here. I'm here. I live to tell the tale. So I'm here. So a lot of me sort of dissecting it is for other people to truly understand because so many people don't understand the inner workings of whatever it is, whether it's like, having fibroids, dealing with, racism a certain way or, whatever. And so I want to really get to the point where I can explain like, whoa, this is what it felt, what it felt like. And this is the view from here. This is my view of it. This is my take on it. And it may be different than anything you've heard before, because I come from all these different intersections, because as you said, there's suffering and there's an understanding and an experience of poverty, but there's also real privilege. And so there are all of these kind of weird, like, sort of intersections where i'm I'm African. Yes, I wasn't allowed to speak English in my house, so I'm very African. We didn't eat American food, but at the same time I grew up in America. So I am, to an extent, Black American, and that I understand, like I remember when I was, I don't know what grade, it was elementary school. It must have been like second or third grade. I was really, no, it was 1977 because it was when Roots came out. And I was getting a lot of racism and racist comments. And I remember that I would get teased by the Black Americans, and they'd be like, "You African, you Kunta Kinte, Kizzy, blah, blah, blah," And so I remember I went home and I said to my dad, like, I was upset. I was crying. And I said, they're calling me. They're saying, "Oh, you African, you this." And he said, "You go back to school and you tell them, yes, I am a proud African. I am an Ashanti." And I was like, yeah, that's not going to work. I was like, that's not going to work. And it was really clear that my parents didn't understand racism because they'd never dealt with it in the context of, I mean, they were raised in a Black country where everybody was Black, everybody, the bad people, the good people, the, rich people, the poor people, so they didn't understand what was happening in America. So for me, it's like I've always been standing on some kind of hyphen. And so I try to write from the viewpoint, the vantage point of that hyphen,
Right.
and give people how I see whatever that experience was and how it happened to me. Because I don't think that you should be writing if you're not willing to give up the goods. I don't think you should be writing if you're not really willing to tell the full truth, about how you felt, what you went through. And now, mind you, too, um, when I say tell the full truth, there are different truths. If you and I see an accident, I will see a different accident than you will see. So facts are one thing. The fact of an accident, the fact of one car hitting something else, that won't change. But your truth of the experience and my truth of the experience may well be different based on so many different things, including your past and my past. If you've been in an accident before and you're traumatized and it triggers something in the midst of that, you might have a very different experience of what happened than I would. And so what I'm bringing to it is my truth and the whole of my truth.
But I think
Yeah.
what's exceptional about that is you are also willing to take responsibility. I think when a lot of
Yes.
people talk about their truth, it's what was done to them, not what they also did. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of what makes your stories special, and I think makes them a more engaging read. Because when I read it, it's not like, oh, this poor woman, all these things happened to her. It's like she had these hardships, but she also is fully willing to say, I didn't do this well. I struggled with this. This was challenging. I didn't know what to do here. I tried again. And I think
Yeah.
that as a narrative and that as an experience as a reader is so much more interesting than just sort of a deluge of trauma. Because enough
Well,
stuff was hard in your stories, but it's also like,
yeah.
oh, this is a person that is moving rather than stagnant.
Yeah. I think that that just boils down, honestly, to telling the truth also, because we are not cutting straight lines. You know, we are so not cutting straight lines. We all live with our contradictions, and fessing up to those contradictions is really important. Like, yes, I went through all that I went through in my teen years, I was also a cheerleader. I was also a mean girl. It was like, you know what I mean? I also tortured some people,
Yeah.
in my
Yeah.
own way. And so you can't just kind of tell the oh woe is me side of it. There's also, like there was something that you did,
Yeah.
you know. And if things happen to people without them, bringing it on. I'm not saying that people bring on what happens to them, certainly not trying to blame the victim, but I'm saying that we we are full people. We have these full experiences, and we have contradictions even within the experiences. And to be able to tell the truth about it can be difficult. Like people who have been sexually abused in one way or the other find it difficult to reconcile the fact that they were abused. They did not bring that upon themselves necessarily, with the fact that while something was happening that they didn't want to happen, their body reacted a different way. Some people, orgasm while they're in the midst of being sexually abused. And so that is a difficult, that's what I'm talking about, is that we need to get to the point where we're starting to, really talk about that stuff. You know what I mean? Where, that's where for me, I'm really, when I read and that's going on, that's what really gets me. It's like, oh wow, now we're getting to like the truth. Because it's just, I don't know. I find that we tend to, as a society, we tend to find the languaging for something.
Right.
Like let's use the example of depression. I wrote a book almost 30 years ago now, a memoir on depression, and people often ask me how much has everything changed? How much has changed? What's the same? What's going on? And I say, well, a lot has changed, but a lot really hasn't changed. And, when you look at the fact that there's therapy here, therapy there, you can do therapy on your phone, you can, so everybody's saying, oh, therapy, 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 therapy. And people use words like anxiety and trigger, and, they have all these words that they're using in just everyday speak. But whenever there's a very sort of public suicide or some sort of public event, people then say, I see this stuff on social media. Oh, go check on your friends, especially like, the strong ones. And I'm thinking, what's that gonna do? Well, like seriously, when I've been in the midst of the deepest depressions, a phone call from somebody that I've not heard from in 3 weeks, 1 month, 5 months, whatever, is not what's gonna suddenly make me not do something. It just really isn't, as opposed to the message of creating community, creating spaces where people are able on a daily basis to be able to, talk, having that empathy, having that grace for people to say, "Hey, how you doing?" And if they say, "Oh, I'm having a hard day," to not say, "Okay, well, gotta go, bye," and to
Right.
really hear them and to hear what people are saying, because a lot of people will tell you the truth of what's going on. We just don't choose to listen.
You have to ask. That's the thing, and be interested in the
Exactly.
answer, and I think
Exactly.
that's missing in great part. And so this is what I wondered as well. At one point you wrote, the illusion of strength has been and continues to be of great significance to me as a Black woman. I was
Yes.
wondering, you go from all of this stuff that was hard, right, to then all
Mhm.
of a sudden being the voice for at least Black female depression, and being this signpost for, like, this is the thing. I am the person that now is the representative. Not that you chose to, but it was sort of put on you. How do you go from being just a normal person writing this story to then what you say being the voice for an entire group of people? And how do you reconcile that with your own things that you're going through, your own struggles, your own needs, your own wants? And did people listen?
That's a really, really good question. Um, and it is something that I gave a lot of thought to. And what I did was I approached, when the book was coming out, I approached then it's called Mental Health America now. At the time, it was called the National Mental Health Association. And they exist in all 50 states. And they were having a campaign on clinical depression. And so I joined forces with them. And the wonderful thing about that was that it allowed me to not be the voice while at the same time being an example for them. So when I went on tour, what they did was they gave me a therapist, not for me, not for me, though sometimes I did, though sometimes I did, I did talk to her for me, but they gave me a therapist, and it wasn't necessarily one therapist throughout the whole tour, but it was the fact that they were in all 50 states.
Right.
I had people at my readings who were prepared, mental health professionals who answered questions. And so I spoke about my experience and I spoke about my writing. And so I was not willing to carry that burden of being the voice.
Yeah.
It was something I was really clear about going in. I was not, I would get messages from people, oh, your book saved my life. And then they'll keep emailing me, oh, I really want to commit suicide. I'm like, yo, look, you know, I need to get you with a therapist. And I would, help. My goal is always help them to get to a professional because what worked for me may not work for you. And I'm not a professional. I'm an expert of my life. I'm not an expert of that subject. I did not go to school to be a therapist. I'm an expert in my life. That's where the authority is my experience. And I can share that with you as a writer, and so I'm really clear about the boundaries and the limits, and I do say that often when I'm speaking, when I have speaking engagements, and I always make sure that with people's questions, I respond responsibly, which is I will tell them, well, my experience is this, and then I will tell them how you can get help.
Great.
Get that person help. You can get help. This can happen. And so I would say that that's how I protected myself.
Yeah.
But even with that, it became too much, and I sort of just stepped away from it in a little bit. I stepped away from it after maybe a few years because it was, all the speaking engagements were about depression and suicide and and then also all the invitations that I would get to write essays were about, like I remember when I just said, okay, I'm done, was somebody invited me to write for their anthology and they wanted to write about depression and hair. And I just thought,
No.
okay, I'm done. Okay, I'm done. Because that's a sentence. When I'm depressed, I don't comb my hair. I'm done. That's it. So, it's just, I don't know. I felt I had said everything I had to say in that moment on that subject. And so, you know, I just stepped away from it. And I really wanted to also talk about, something else that I write a lot about, which is immigration. I wanted to talk about immigration. But of course, my hands were tied. And that's what's interesting is that my hands were tied because I was undocumented. And so even throughout the writing, there was a 25-year edition that came out of, 25th anniversary edition that came out of my memoir. And in the afterword, I talk about how silence has been a real problem. And the fact that, even as I was writing the book about depression, one of the primary things that really, really affected me in my 20s with depression, I could not talk about without putting myself in danger. I couldn't talk about it. You know, um, so it's great to be able to talk about it now. Although I have to say, and you asked about what led me to leave the US was I started having a lot of anxiety. And by that, I don't mean that casually. I started having like PTSD about the president that I believed was going to be coming because in President Trump's first term, they created an office of denaturalization and with the specific goal of stripping people of their naturalization. And I just to have to go through a lot of what I went through, um, which included and involved attempted sexual abuse by an attorney, because a lot of attorneys exploit people who have no alternative, because they can threaten you with, oh, you're undocumented, so I'll turn you in if you don't, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So, I had just gone through too much and I made the goal and now you're changing the goalpost. Essentially it's like in the middle of the game, you're changing the goalpost. And I was done with the game. I'd gotten the citizenship.
But also, I do think there's something that's so morally aberrant about what's going on, right? Like I think there's a point too where one could easily just say as well, besides having achieved the goal, this is wrong and I don't
Well,
want to
yes.
participate in this system. Like that's enough by itself. And I
Oh,
think
yes.
if you have a place to go that is other than where we are now,
Yes.
it makes every bit of sense that you would go there.
It was just really scary. And it was very clear that they were coming after immigrants, they were coming after women, and they were coming after people of color. And I happen to fit into all of those categories neatly. And so I said, I just, you know what? I'm in my 50s. I'm done. But it's like, I'm done. I'm tired. I can't do this. I don't want to do this. The amount of fear and trauma. And then also, I honestly believe that we can all help and we all fight in different ways.
True.
And, the saying, the pen is mightier than the sword. I can write and I can write in peace from here and I can help, in the ways that I can help. But not everybody helps by marching. Some people help by, giving water, providing food. Some people help by, giving information, blowing a whistle, doing whatever. We all help in the way that we can. And I knew that I just couldn't help in that way.
I understand. I mean, I understand. And I think it's a big point of sad wonder where we're going here. And I
Yeah.
think that's the thing. And I think people forget how many of us come from other places, how many of us are minorities, how many of us are. I think this is the thing that really rubs me about what's going on now is what's happening now is just a much more aggravated assault than what was done before. But the systematic modes of oppression, incarceration, denial of services, subjugation, those are all here. The echo is just so much bigger. But this is a
Yeah.
systemic problem we've had forever. And my hope is like, okay, maybe it's time to like just burn it down. But if we
Yeah.
don't burn it down, we can't go back to only going after, 20% of this minority instead of everything. Like all the pieces were in place for this to be where we are. It all has to go.
Well, here's the thing though, is that I agree with you because I think when people say, oh, the system is broken, well, what about if the system is working exactly as it's supposed to?
Yes.
What about if somebody is working the system to the fullest degree, you know? And we see now, I grew up taking civics courses just like everybody else who came up around the time that I came up in the US. I used to believe in the separation, the separation, of church and state, and the separation of powers. There's the executive, the judicial, I believed in all of that. And now I thought that we were, the United States was a nation of laws.
Yes.
And now I understand it as a nation of suggestions
Yes.
and codes, but not actual laws. And where that came into sharp focus for me was during President Trump's first term, when I kept hearing, well, that's a violation of the Hatch Act. That's a violation of the Hatch Act. And they kept saying that. Everything was like, well, they're not supposed to do that. That's a violation of the Hatch Act. And I thought, what is that? Okay, the Hatch Act, but what's the consequence? And there was no there was no consequence. And when we have this separation of powers, that all circles back to the executive. And so we're trusting that the executive, that the head of state is going to be a decent human being. At least Nixon was decent enough to get on that helicopter on the South Lawn. You know what I mean? At least he was decent enough to do that. Regardless of all his whatever, he at least did that. Now we've reached this sort of, yep, nope, I'm not doing it, where the president is now, saying racist stuff. I mean, I've never thought, I mean, during his first term, I was like, what? The president of the United States is bullying journalists? Like I remember he said Don Lemon is the stupidest man in the country or something, the stupidest journalist. And I thought, what? Because growing up, you're like, the president of the United States, like the head of the free world, or, whatever they call it. It was like, I can't believe that you're using the White House as a bully pulpit. And now it's just trickled down into society.
Yeah.
And that in combination with all these keyboard warriors on social media who don't have to show their faces. And so they feel empowered to just sit there and write all kind of hate and rubbish. And it's just so much, it's so vile, all this hate that is just spreading. And I mean, of course, I think the only way, and Martin Luther King said this, that, only love will drive out hate. And so, yes, we must practice love, but at the same time, Alex Preddy died practicing love. He was killed,
But
and
also,
so yeah,
all those systems, though, I mean, again, going after minority communities since the United States began, it just wasn't
right.
this pronounced. And my feeling is, okay, now you see the full flourishing of all of these evils that have been in place for so long. They need to go. There no longer can be sort of systematic targetization. You can't have women dying trying to get medical care. Like all these, there has to be an overall and cohesive change. And that's where I wonder, if we're going to get there. And two, I think the voices that we need to listen to are not getting as much oxygen as I wish that they did, you know?
Yes. Well,
And
that's
that's,
always the case, isn't it?
yes.
Yes.
But I
Yeah.
think you should
But
write
they
this
but it will
piece.
it will it will trickle down. I mean, people will listen. I do. I think the Ta-Nehisi Coates are there. I think I just think the people are there who will uh speak truth to power. And all of us are trying. All of us are
Yeah.
trying. But I also think that what's important to understand, and there have been many articles written about it during the Black Lives
Mm.
Matter movement after George Floyd. There were a lot of articles written about how activists actually have a higher suicide rate, how
I believe that.
activists, really suffer from depression. So there's a real need also for an understanding of self-care. an understanding of this is what I can do. And, everybody, if everybody has a shoulder to the wheel, we will move the car forward. But this is the shoulder that I can use, like this is what I can do. And understanding your limit and understanding that rest is necessary, understanding that protecting your mental health is necessary. I posted something a couple of days ago on Facebook, on my Facebook, saying, please bear in mind that for many people, these discussions of Jeffrey Epstein are deeply triggering because of their own histories of sexual abuse. And so proceed with empathy, empathy, yeah, empathy. Understand that it's not easy. These women have come forward, and there are a lot of people, maybe even somebody you're working with, somebody somebody you're living with, maybe, who has not yet had the voice to speak. And this might be triggering, but also possibly empowering.
Right.
Or possibly pushing them deeper. It can go either way. You never know. It just depends. It depends on, there's so many different, things that are in motion. There's so many movable parts to it. So, moving forward in an empathetic way, but I do have to say that we find ourselves in a real place of I don't want to use the word truth again, but in a real reckoning, in a real place of reckoning, because you said that, these things were at play before, just not as much. I would disagree and say they were in play as much. But I would say what was also in play was an illusion. What was also in play was the fact that you got to have a salary that put you in a middle class house.
Sure. Sure.
That gave you enough to be able to buy a car, go on vacation, go to Pizza Hut, go to Sizzler, go, go to Disneyland once a year, go watch movies, send your kid to a decent public school.
Right.
You got enough of an illusion. You got enough to make you not feel like a spoke in the wheel.
Okay.
You got just enough. And so now it's gone.
Yeah.
That is completely gone. We barely have a middle class in that country. That is completely gone. People are struggling paycheck to paycheck and trying to put up a facade. A lot of people, if they had one significant situation, health situation or an accident or something, it would throw them into homelessness. A lot of people are really operating on the edge. And so what's happening now is that we're seeing that, you know, we're seeing this reality, and then you've got these people who are, wanting to go back to some myth of, whatever it is that they're believing they're going to get from having like an all white Christian nation with women barefoot and pregnant and, people of color invisible and like whatever, fake Norman Rockwell painting they're trying to get back to. It just, it's kind of bizarre because you've got the reality that people have no health care. You've got the reality that we have incredible housing issues.
Right.
A lot of people are unhoused. A lot of people have serious food insecurity in the United States. So you've got these very, very real issues. And then you've got people who are saying, we're in our glory days. And I'm like, what?
It's very discordant. It's all very, very discordant.
Exactly. But so now I think that people are understanding a little bit better. I think people are choosing to understand because they understand, they see themselves as a spoke in the wheel. They see themselves as expendable, whereas before they did not, And so I think that is one of the differences. I think there are many, but that is one of the differences. Yeah.
Well, I think, and to dovetail off of this, I think what, struck me again so much in your writing is your embrace of what is difficult, your embrace of what is inequitable. Like
Hmm.
at one point you said, of depression, just because I thought this quote was poignant. Most
Hmm.
times it's in its most superficial and seductive sense, it is rich and enticing, a field of velvet waiting to embrace me. And part of what struck me about that is most people see it as a burden or a failing or whatever, right? But I think what's so interesting in your writing is all these things that are difficult in some way, it feels like you're able to kind of embrace it or to like go with the wave or to go with the moment. And then I don't know if it's
Hmm.
because you have the confidence you're going to come back out, but I find your ability to say like, here is where I am, and I accept where I am, and I can even see some beauty in this challenge. And I
Hmm.
thought that was so moving and so different. And I was hoping you could talk about some because I feel like that is in all of your writing, is these very difficult situations that you kind of almost step into because they're unavoidable, but you're not angry. You don't resent it. You're not fighting it. You're like, this is where I am now. And I'm curious, how do you do that?
I no, I'm just telling the story. I mean, for me, that is the reality of it, is that there are times where depression does feel like that because the world feels so awful and burdensome, and getting up to sort of deal with it just feels, like this again, but then the this again is life, right? You're saying like, like you wake up and it's like, oh, I'm awake again. And it's like, what, you would rather not be awake, but it's not that you don't want to be awake, it's that you don't want to be awake to
Okay.
this. And so sometimes, being in bed and just sort of watching television, if you can, it gets to a point where you can't even do that, but watching television or reading a book, if you're able to do that. There are times where I'm not able to do anything, I'm just congealed to the sheets, but
Okay.
you know um but there are times where it's so inviting to just let go and to
Yeah.
just be in that state, of, I don't want to wash the dishes. I don't want to see anybody. I just want to I just want to be here.
Okay.
I just want to be here, in this space. And, you know, it does feel like that. I mean, that's not all it feels like. It feels like other things at different times, but there is that. And I wouldn't be entirely, entirely honest if I didn't say that, yeah, there is that, that is part of it too.
And when you write about this, and then I'd like to get to menopause as well, do you embellish or do you stick to the facts or do you heighten the story in any way?
No, I don't embellish.
Okay.
No. What I do sometimes is I'll create like a composite,
Okay.
in terms of a character, or
Okay.
I will condense time sometimes, but I don't embellish and say, sadly, life is you don't need to embellish. It's already like crazy enough,
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah, no, I don't. I mean, I think that, um, like most writers, I have a flair for the dramatic with my choice of words, but
Yeah.
I think that's more just imagery and description,
Yeah.
not so much embellishment. Yeah.
And so when you got to writing your story for the Big M, which was a collection on menopause, I'm curious,
Yes.
how did the experience of menopause and writing about it, was it different than the other experiences you'd written about? And if so, how? And then in talking about menopause, because there's so little except like, oh, you have a hot flash or oh, this, but it's like, it is this seismic shift in every part of who you are, and sometimes quite debilitating. And it
Yeah.
continues to shock me the degree to which there is so little science, so little interest, so little insurance coverage, all these things. And I'm curious, like, this was yet another sort of hurdle, I imagine, for you to look at and say, oh, here's a whole nother broken system. But like, talk to me about your approach to that, and then talk to me about writing it and what the experience was like for that different condition.
Okay. This is The Big M that was edited by Lydia Yuknovich. And I want to begin there because Lydia, brilliant Lydia, Lydia, who I read her book, The Chronology of Water, that's a film now that Kristen Stewart directed. And I was floored by that book. And so I went to Portland, Oregon. I was living in Los Angeles. I flew to Portland to take a writing workshop with her.
Oh,
Yeah, I think we take turns being student and teacher, so I love taking writing workshops. So I flew to Portland to take a writing workshop with her. It was a weekend workshop, and she had this exercise, and her workshop, well, I don't know if it's, I don't want to call it a school, but her facility is called corporeal writing. And she really works a lot with what we hold in our body, the emotions and the experiences that we hold in our body. So one of the exercises that she gave us in a timed writing was to write something titled A Brief but Detailed History of My Blank, right?
okay.
And I had been having back problems, and I was like, oh, I'm going to write about my back. I'm going to write about my back because I've been carrying so much burden on my back. And this, so I knew going in that I was going to write about my back.
Yeah.
And then I put the pen to paper and I started writing about my uterus. I started writing about my uterus. And I was like, oh, this is wow. And so I just remember being kind of done. And I had just actually maybe a year before had a hysterectomy. Maybe not even a year before. I'd had a hysterectomy. But for some reason, because my back pain was much more prevalent and much more like chronic and consistent, I thought, oh, that's what I'm going to write about. So I wrote this during her workshop and I put it away. And that was it.
Okay.
And then she was editing this book and we had a conversation and I said, well, I've got this part of a piece. And I had just put it away. I hadn't thought about it. I would write little posts and stuff on Facebook about menopause, but I've not written about menopause. And what I wanted to do was I still feel like some of the writing, it's so disembodied. It's like, okay, this is what's going on with my body now at 55, at 58, or whatever. But I feel like, I've had these experiences that are living inside of this part of my body. What is informing that? What is informing, the illnesses? What is informing the way that I'm experiencing menopause? And so that's what the writing ended up being. That essay ended up really being a back and forth with my childhood. Um, I came face to face with, my childhood self. And I wrote about coming on my period, so young and not being told anything except, don't be bad. Don't do anything bad. And it's like, I didn't know what anything bad was, not like that, but also just being made to feel not just in the house but in society in general that everything that was above of my upper thigh to my navel was like bad, something that was like a source of shame, a source of what, just something that was like, oh, it was just everything was just negative. Everything was just negative. And so I really wanted to unpack all of that, particularly because for me, a lot of the piece was also an elegy to my uterus because I didn't realize all that I had been through up until I started like writing that essay. I didn't realize all that I had held inside, all of the pain, the fear, the anger, the everything that I had held inside, my womb. And I had, had, abortions. I had fibroids before, and had, surgery to remove fibroids. I had endometriosis, you know, and then I had a really complicated pregnancy that were it not for the doctor who I happened to, work with, I probably would have died, especially seeing the record of Black women dying, in the midst. So I had a really complicated pregnancy. And so just kind of going through all of that and grieving and mourning and kind of saying goodbye, and then understanding what is happening to me now, because even though I had the doctor who delivered my daughter and saw me through most of my adulthood, did, the surgeries for me, the fibroid, the myomectomy for the fibroids, the partial hysterectomy, all of that. Then, you know, I went to meet with him post-surgery, and it was like he gave me medicine for, a dry vagina. And I was like, well, I never said that my vagina was dry. And he was like, basically like, oh no, for your boyfriend or your husband. I've been seeing this, I've been seeing this doctor for decades. And I was like, I have never talked to you about a sexual partner. I mean, yes, you may assume that I'd had one because I was pregnant, obviously, but I have never come in and specifically said to you, I have this issue with my sexual partner. And I just thought that that was so presumptive. And I thought that, I'm talking about my issues of menopause, and his primary concern was that whoever I'm having sex with can get off.
Yeah.
And I was speechless. I mean, I'm still like,
Yeah.
what? And so I decided, okay, maybe I've gone as far as I can go with him. So I just started seeing other medical professionals, traditional Chinese medicine, sleep specialists. I just started looking at all the things that were wrong with me and seeing various specialists. And the one that took me the farthest was the doctor who said to me, because sleep was my big problem.
Yeah.
At the start of menopause, I would, or peri or whatever, it just all bleeds together into one, no pun intended. But at the start of that, I would wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning like clockwork, and then I could not get back to sleep. And then I wouldn't be able to sleep. It moved into a complete insomnia where I wouldn't be able to fall asleep. And, so actually Lydia said, try a weighted blanket. And that really, really helped. And then this doctor said to me, you're a mother. And I said, yes. When you had your daughter, how did you put her to sleep? Did you feed her and then immediately put her down? I said, no. He goes, you burped her, right? I said, yeah. And he goes, that's your acid reflux. So he was like, so you can't eat and go right to bed. You can't eat and lay down, right? And then he said, you probably bathed your daughter and made sure that the temperature in the room was comfortable, probably just a little cool, not too warm, right? And I said, yes. He said, That's also something you can do. Ritualize your bedtime like you did for your child. You probably read to your daughter. I said, yeah. He said, audiobooks are good. And so I started doing that. Girl, I was sleeping through the I was sleeping through the night. I was right. I was right as rain. And basically what it is self-care. We forget.
Yeah.
We forget that there's certain things that we need. We give it to our babies, we give it to our pets, we give it to our cars. you know, we give it to our cars. We like change the oil, we go wash the cars, where everything is ritualistic, and then we abuse ourselves. And then, we start having all these problems. And that's because the body is saying, hey, 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 pay attention to me. But, loving on yourself, taking that time for yourself. Not everything went away, but a lot of it, changing my diet helped significantly. Waking up in the morning and going out into the sunlight
Right.
and taking a walk, because the sunlight on your retina, it adjusts your circadian rhythm.
Yeah.
Doing these little things that you can do yourself, and then also just, moving your body, which is something that a lot of us
Forget.
artists don't do.
Yeah.
Moving your body, getting up from behind the desk and, actually like walking and, getting your heart rate up and doing all of that. And it doesn't have to be anything crazy. You don't have to go and, go to the gym and lift all these weights or whatever. Get yourself a rebounder. So I just started really reading, and it felt empowering in a way that, you hear all these doctors that say, oh, this isn't going to happen. My cholesterol was high and my doctor wanted to put me on medicine. I was like, I don't want to take any more medicine.
Yeah.
And so I said, I'm going to do it naturally. And he said, I've never heard of any diet that's going to bring down cholesterol. And I thought, well, I have. I know people that are able to bring down their cholesterol. And so it's just, understanding that you can take back your power, particularly when it's over your own body.
Yeah.
And that's something that a lot of women don't have, in so many ways, between the men who are our gynecologists, and sadly also women who are our gynecologists. Gender sometimes doesn't matter. I had a gynecologist who I had some kind of, maybe kind of infection, but it was an infection that would clear up on its own.
Mhm.
It would probably clear up on its own, kind of thing. I got it shortly after COVID, from going to the pool because they had over chlorinated the pool.
Yeah.
And so I get this infection. I go to the doctor. She gives me this antibiotic, and it said like, oh, don't take with alcohol, but they say that with everything. And so I had like a glass of wine, and I nearly killed myself because this antibiotic was like one of the three or four that like you
Right.
cannot take with any alcohol. And then I found out when I was reading about it that it crosses the blood-brain barrier. I mean, like
Right.
it's a terribly strong antibiotic. And I thought, why would you give me this? And so the more that I was reading about it,
Yeah.
I found that they've been giving this to women. It was like throw the whole kitchen sink. They've been giving this to women since the 1950s. And there are so many other antibiotics. And so I went to this woman and I said, why would you mess me up like this? Why would you do this? And she said, oh, this is what we were taught. And I was like, so you don't question what you were taught by some old person who, has been,
Yeah.
seriously, by some old man probably who's been doing this. You don't kind of question that. And so she and I had a whole conversation, and she was very receptive, but I just, I think that we often sometimes also expect that women are more sensitive to our our bodies if we are women, and it's not always the case. It's not always the case. And also I just also want to add that I'm not a, you know, I personally if she her, but I'm not somebody who believes in the binary strictly. So it's not just that. It's, you know, I mean, in many cases, I did and I know we're pressed for time, but I just want to
No, no,
quickly say this.
please, please.
I did a conference in, I believe it was either 98 or 99. They sent me to somewhere in Tennessee. It wasn't Memphis. It was somewhere in Tennessee. Maybe it wasn't Memphis, but there was like the Parthenon. It was like a duplicate of the Parthenon was there. It was in Tennessee though. And because I thought, this is an interesting place to have the Parthenon. But it was a conference of intersex people.
Oh, interesting.
And I I had no idea. I mean, I was, you know, 30, 31, and I literally had no idea. And I don't, you know, they went and I thought, why are they sending me here to talk about Black women and depression? You know? So I went and I had the time of my life because it was like I was educated in ways that I had not been educated before. I had no knowledge of what an intersex person was, what that meant, what was being done to intersex people. And so I bring that up to say that all of our bodies are different.
Yeah.
All of our bodies are different. And if we don't empower ourselves to take care of our bodies and to talk to people who respect, and not just respect the body, but our bodies, you know, people who respect our bodies, whether our bodies are larger, smaller, whether our bodies are presenting as male, presenting as female, somewhere in between,
Yeah.
you know, I feel like we need to move past all of these strictures right now
Agreed.
because people are dying and people are suffering. And a lot of people are really suffering because they just don't have that that power over themselves to say, I'm going to take my health in my own hands. I'm going to find this. And also it's becoming less and less possible to do that as doctors are afraid,
I know.
you know. So that's also an issue. The doctors now are afraid to talk, to prescribe, to do
Yeah.
because they're being penalized, you
Yeah.
know. So we're entering a really dangerous place for anybody who is non-heterosexual male white.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And I think part of what I hope too is that there's all these ideas of supposed to, and I sort of want all of that to go away. It's like you
Yeah.
can be whatever it is that you are, and that's great and that's fine. And then it's sort of like, okay, how do I meet and understand wherever it is that you are and just accept that? And I think people feel
Yeah.
compelled to fit in a box. And I think, intersex is such a great example of it's so different person to person, like radically different person to person. But also,
Exactly.
if there is a space where people can occupy all these different things, does isn't that beautiful? Isn't that
Yeah.
expansive? Isn't that amazing? And the fact
Exactly.
that it's sort of seen as this problem, it's like, no, it's amazing that people can occupy all these different things. And there's
Yeah.
power in that.
And then also, it's what's happening.
Yeah.
You cannot, as an individual, decide we are going to have only men and only women. You know, you cannot, as an individual, as a person, decide when nature itself is deciding something else and doing something else.
Yeah.
That's the part that to me is absolutely bizarre. It's like, do you understand nature? You know? And so, yeah, no, it's there's a lovely young woman, ooh, her name, because that's the part. The ginkgo biloba hasn't kicked in. Her name is Alicia. She's an intersex person who's written a wonderful memoir on, and I can't pronounce her last name, it begins with a W, Weigel. Anyway, she's written a wonderful a book about being intersex, and she has the XY chromosomes, but she presents rather very, very, feminine, blonde,
Yeah.
gorgeous woman, you know. And so, and she was born with testes inside. And so she said that, she wanted to go and tell all these guys that had been hitting on her in Texas. She's based in Texas. All these guys in the legislature, because she's a political consultant or something.
Yeah.
And she said, I want to go tell all these guys that they've been hitting on somebody with balls. And I just love that. I mean, I think that that's again where we get into the illusions
Yes.
that we create and that we want to sustain. And that's not really reality, you know? And then something else that I love is my friend Noah Jordan, who was my neighbor and is a dear friend, was a neighbor like in my 20s, is a dear friend. We were out one day and somebody asked him, are you gay? Which I just thought, like, why would you ask somebody that? But he says, are you gay? And Noah had the best answer I've ever heard. He said, if you needed to know, you would.
That's good. I'm going to
I
take
love
that.
that answer.
I'm
That is
taking
the
that.
truth of it, though, isn't it? That some of these things that we feel entitled to know, like when people sort of say, this person is trans, and then somebody's like, well, I wonder if they've had the operation. I'm like, why are you concerned with what is in their pants? Like, why? What difference does that make to your life? Do you want somebody concerned about what is in your pants? And I feel like we need to kind of move away from this sort of society where we feel like we don't want to know the truths about certain things, but we
Right.
feel entitled to know and to abuse people who we feel are different. And we want to know or claim to know everything about them and their experience.
I think it's this systemic idea of oppressing others to build up yourself. I think if you find someone that you can in some way diminish, I don't understand it, but I think it makes people feel better then. And I think that and the lack of empathy, I think, are the real
Mm.
sicknesses that we need to eradicate here.
That's interesting. Toni Morrison said something about that
Mm,
about people who the only way that they can feel tall is if they have somebody else on their knees.
yes.
That's the only way that they can feel tall is by bringing somebody else to their knees. And I think that's true. But then
Sadly.
what makes people feel so small? I think that that's also a question we need to get into is why are people feeling so disempowered in their
I
lives?
I think you answered that earlier when you said middle class gone, jobs gone, health gone. Like, I think those things are completely tied together where you feel small because of all the stuff you mentioned. And the only thing you can do to make yourself feel better is to look at someone else and say, ooh, how do I diminish them? Because then I'm better than them. But also,
Yeah,
I don't understand that idea where you not don't look at them and say like, "Oh, we can form an alliance. We can form a
yeah,
friendship. We can form
yeah,
something because we both
yeah,
have a shared feeling." That's the part I don't understand. Is why it goes negative and
yeah.
not something better.
I don't know. I think that I think people are highly susceptible to just influence and to
Yeah.
persuasion. And so when there are people who are mean, because I said earlier that I was a bit of a mean girl.
Yeah.
No, I was. I say that. I mean, every time I think about it, it just hurts my heart. It just hurts my heart that I was that person, you know. But I mean, I didn't do anything like horrible, horrible in terms of like, well, I did do one thing that was really bad. But it was actually somebody who was being mean to me,
Right.
and I put some Nair in her shampoo. But
Did that yield a result or no? It
yes,
did? Yes.
yes,
I
yes.
understand.
She's probably gonna like watch this podcast and go, it was her. But anyway, but what I'm saying though is that I was in a lot of advanced placement classes and that kind of stuff. And but they were like the nerds, and I was like hanging out with the cool people because I
Okay.
didn't want to be a nerd. And so for me to be with them meant that I had to kind of turn my back on people who I knew were kind, decent, and much better in character than the people that I was
Yeah.
hanging around with. But because I wanted to, you know, be seen,
Yeah.
be popular, be,
Yeah.
whatever it is, I didn't want to disappear. And I felt like in the rest of my life, I was disappearing.
I understand.
And so I didn't want to disappear. So in those days, it really was this feeling of I'm choosing myself over you.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
choosing myself over you. Now, as an adult, that's not at all how I would see it.
Yeah.
I would see it as I am forming an alliance. I am standing with the person that I know is a good, true, decent person. And I'm going to form this alliance because you are a jerk, you know. But at the time, that wasn't at all, the case. And I think sometimes, particularly with kids, yes, I get that.
Yeah.
But some people I realize, never move beyond childhood.
Yeah.
And also, I will say that we are not being encouraged
No.
to move beyond puberty because we have got this social media that, as a writer, you take something to a publisher and they say, how many people follow you?
Oof.
And you're like, I'm just going, are you serious right now? Are you serious right now? Because again, like being the cheerleader, like being popular, it is completely antithetical to the other situation, which is going and studying and getting your grades and doing the work and buckling down versus hanging out and drinking and skipping school and being at the parties and so you've got like, okay, to be on social media and to have like a gazillion followers, and I remember I was talking to an editor recently because I'd sent the project, the immigration project, I'd
Mm.
sent that out and it got some rejections. Well, it got all rejections actually. And yes, and which, when that happens for me, it's like the universe is saying this is not the right time.
Okay.
Go back and do it. I don't really take it personally in
Okay.
that way. So I go, okay, great. And I'm talking to one of the editors who I know, and she says, well, you don't have a huge social media following, and our marketing department really needs that. And I said, some that's bullshit.
Yeah.
Your marketing people need me to do their work for them. I'm already writing the book.
Yeah.
Why can't they come out and find a marketing plan? Why is it that I either have to have a platform and bring to them my platform or, have a social media following? Why is it that that's the case for somebody to actually get a book published? What's your job? At this point, it's like, what's your job?
Yeah.
Because this feels like I'm giving you a whole lot of something for 10%, if
Well,
even.
but also to be fair, that's why self-publishing is exploding, and it really is. I mean, I would encourage you to look at that. A lot of legitimate people self-publish at this point because it goes direct to the people who actually want to read it, and they get all the money, which as far as I'm concerned, great. I would much rather that deal.
Yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's true. That's like Annie DeFranco,
Yes.
years and years ago,
Yeah.
how she was, doing her own music and yeah, Righteous Babe Productions, that she
Yeah.
started that like a gazillion years ago.
Yeah.
And they, pretty soon the industry was begging her to come and sign because she had a really strong following. And she was like, no, I don't think so,
Okay.
you
So
know.
just a thought, like maybe you call me up, we do an awesome portrait for your book, and then we throw it out there. We see what we can do.
Okay. All
I'm
right.
down. Also, I just, I found your work a long time ago and I was like, I don't know, I just thought this would be a great conversation and you were really such a joy to talk to and you are more than I even thought you would be, which I am so grateful for.
Oh, well, that's so sweet. Thank you.
It
Oh
was
my gosh.
wonderful. I really
Thank you.
appreciate you
This
very,
was a
very
lovely
much.
conversation. And I love your work. I went on your
Oh,
website
thank
and
you
so
for
I was
looking.
like, oh,
But I'm grateful for the conversation and I'm grateful for your work and I love hearing about how you do what you do because you do have such a different voice. And that's not easy.
thank you. I appreciate that.
You
And
too.
especially because I'm writing,
Let's
I'm
get
writing
there.
some, I'm writing some, well, no, I put the immigration book aside. I'm
Okay.
writing a collection of essays called How to Be Tender.
Ooh, can't wait.
And yeah, so yeah, we'll
Let me know
see.
when it's on its way out into the world.
Okay, I will do that.
I really
Okay.
appreciate you. Have a wonderful time in your
Thank
newer
you.
home, and
Thank
I
you.
would I would love to stay in touch.
I would like that too. Thank you so
Cool.
much.
It's
All
my
right.
pleasure. We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Bye.